Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Fortin. I'm the host of this podcast, Doers Within Emerging Markets. And I just want to share my experience with using Anchor so far. When the pandemic started, I thought about starting a podcast, and the whole idea was to bring in some really amazing folks that are doing some great work in their respective industries within the emerging markets. And the Anchor platform really helped me get the word out there and also just make it a lot easier for me to invite the guest and just share the amazing experiences they've had and the amazing work they're doing in their respective industries within the emerging markets. So it's pretty fun. You don't even worry about the technical part of making a podcast. You actually just focus more on the content. And Anchor has done it really well for me. So I will highly encourage anybody who is trying to start a podcast to try to use. Just check out Anchor, and I think you won't regret it. I'm not a technical person, but if you listen to these episodes that I've been publishing so far, it seems like I know what the technical part of it, but Anchor helps you take care of the technical part, and you just focus on the content. So feel free to check it out. I highly encourage. You won't regret it, and it's right there. You don't pay anything. So in times like this, I think starting a podcast and getting the word out there, irrespective of what you're doing, will be a really great experience. So thank you guys for listening to my episodes. Please check out Anchor, and you will have a great time. So cheers, guys, and see you guys next episode. Thanks. Hi, everyone. So welcome to another episode of Time for Emerging Markets, Doers Within Emerging Markets. I'm here with Zahin, a good friend of mine. We met 2 years ago in South Korea, and it's such a pleasure, and I'm truly humbled that she was able to make it today to be on the pod. So how are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Jacob. Just, I think, like the rest of the world, very excited for a new American president.
Likewise. So just going right into it, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and what it was like growing up?
Sure. So I was born in Bangladesh, a little country just east of India. And I spent my early years there, and my family immigrated to Canada when I was 7 years old. I have moved around a lot even while I was in Bangladesh. And once we moved to Canada, we moved around, moved and had different opportunities. I had a lot of exposure to different communities and cultures from a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, I went to university about 3 hours away from home, a university called Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. And Queen's was really, I guess, where I was exposed to not just the diversity that I had received previously, but more about having ownership of maybe what I can do in the world. How can I maximize my story? How can I tell my story? How can I maximize my potential? But I think that it's always interesting when I think about the way I've grown up and where I am today. I try to think about what are the stories that stand out. And I don't know, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about those in today's podcast.
Definitely. I mean, it's you have a very interesting background, and the fact that you moved around a lot growing up kind of brings a lot of richness to your experience, but also a lot that you later on, I think, when I met you in South Korea, you were able to offer to different communities. Something that actually stood out, and we talked about it when I was in Vietnam with you in the summer of 2019. You had worked at this youth development program called AIESEC, if I'm pronouncing it right, in Vietnam. Can you just share a little bit about that and how you got involved in that to begin with?
Yeah. So I think when I mentioned that when I got to university, I really was able to really see what are opportunities available to me and how do I write my story.
Yep.
And that was when I came across AIESEC. So I joined in my first year of university and I got involved as a member and soon I became the president of the local chapter at my university. And so the way that AIESEC is organized, we are a international not-for-profit organization at that time headquartered in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, with country offices in over 100 territories around the world. And Canada specifically had 30 local university chapters at the time, and I was as president of my university. And that was my first, I guess, real exposure to running an organization, leading a team, understanding functional expertise, and it really made me feel like I can make a difference. And so with that in hand, I finished my term. It was a 1 year term as president. I finished my term and I went on an academic exchange to India. I was in India for 6 months, where I again realized that the world is much bigger than we are led to believe. And there's so much to learn and experience. And so I took a year off from school and I decided to pursue working with AIESEC full time. And that was how I ended up in Vietnam. And so, as I mentioned, that AIESEC was present in over 120 countries and territories. And I was really interested in Vietnam because of the country's fast economic growth and I think rich history, which I had the exposure to reading books, getting to know about Daniel Ellsberg, the whistleblower of the Pentagon in the 70s. And I was just really, really curious about this country that I really didn't know a lot about. And I think it was a bit of a leap of faith, but it was a great opportunity because AIESEC in Vietnam is also hosting the organization's annual President's Summit. So 100 some presidents of the various countries and territories were going to be in Vietnam that year. And I was going to be leading the business development team. So I had the responsibility of doing a lot of the fundraising and sponsorship work. And I really dived into the deep end. And I should also highlight, I told my parents that this was going to make me look really good on my law school application. That was how I convinced them to let me take a year off school.
I mean, yeah, I think I had the. I mean, I think when we talked. I mean, you told me about the organization. It's later on I realized it's such a very. They do some really great work across Southeast Asia, and just knowing that after we talked, I realized that was that's a very good experience to have regardless. Just going to that, so we met in Korea, South Korea in 2019. How did you get there, and why was an MBA at Hanyang University the choice you made moving to South Korea?
Yeah. I think this is really fitting to sort of work that you're doing, which is really on emerging markets, right? And there's I think what drew me to emerging markets was first from a educational and intellectual standpoint. I was doing my undergrad in global development studies, so I was interested in the development industry. So after Vietnam, I had the opportunity to join with AIESEC, but in a different capacity, which was to take an internship through the organization because we facilitated global internships to develop young people's leadership potential. And I decided to take that route and joined the Asian Development Bank a special placement or kind of like an internship or a young professional opportunity. And again, continue doing some of my partnership work, but now in a larger capacity in fundraising with bilateral donor agencies and philanthropic organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation. And while I was at the bank, I realized that I needed to further deepen my understanding of emerging markets and really understand how development happens from, and I think it's very complex because there's political dimension, there's a skills dimension, a market dimension, there's civil society, and there's a lot happening there. But while I was at the bank, I had a lot of exposure to South Korea. And that's just because the South Korean government loves to come showcase their innovations at the bank. So we meet a lot of advisors from the Seoul metropolitan government. In my role, I got to do a few visits to partners in South Korea, and that was how I came to meet the team at Hanyang University. And so Hanyang University in South Korea had the president and the vice president join the Asian Development Bank annual meeting, the 50th annual meeting in Yokohama, Japan. And they came there to really demonstrate that they were investing in young people, in entrepreneurship, in the sustainable development goals. And through the various engagements that I had with the university, I felt that it was a great opportunity for me to learn about how does a country go from being at income levels of sub-Saharan Africa in the 1950s to now being the 10th largest economy in the world. And I had that relationship with the team at Hanyang, and so they actually offered me to join them at the university to further their agenda on social entrepreneurship, and also simultaneously to complete my MBA there. So that was really how I ended up in South Korea, and luckily that was how we got to.
Yep, definitely. Can you talk a little bit about while at Hanyang University? Can you talk a little bit about the experience at working at the huge ventures, right, in South Korea, and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah. I think it's hard to answer what I learned. I'm still processing what I learned. Because I was there for a substantial amount of time. I was there for almost 3 years, and that's probably the longest in my young career so far. Mm-hmm. And I think that what I learned from huge ventures is really a mix of course, the career development aspect, the skills, the leadership. There was also so much in terms of culture, and there was also very introspective years of my life. I think moving to Korea was like turning my life upside down. I think especially working at the bank, I was really accustomed to expats, and expats have a certain lifestyle, right? And when I moved to Korea, I wanted to make sure that I was really immersed in the local culture. And I think that was honestly speaking initially was really, really hard. And I would say, Jacob, I think I actually learned a lot from you in terms of, how to just engage people right away. I think it was quite challenging for me to find my fit. And I think that translates a lot to people at Hughes. So I guess then to speak a little bit more specifically about the program itself, so the Hanyang University Global Engagement Center is what we were. We were, and it was an agenda to inspire young people in the region to pursue sort of a mindset around global citizenship, using the tools of social entrepreneurship. So a lot of the work that I was doing, the programs that I was running were really on matching participants, aspiring entrepreneurs across different markets, um, giving them the real hand, first-hand experience of working in cross-functional teams, in learning to communicate, in using tools that I think have really just highlighted the need to be used in this COVID, but really, learning how to do remote work, learning how to hold effective Zoom meetings, learning how to use storm boards and wireframes, and really think about the not just think about, but really to experience the future of work. And that future of work, I think, I hope we can see is rather cosmopolitan, right? It is borderless. It is united. It is hopefully going to be more inclusive and equitable. I think that was the agenda, and the way that we did that was really employing some tried and tested approaches around, setting up boot camps, having toolkits, mentors, and we had a few good, we have a few successful case studies from that.
Definitely. I think, when I was coming to South Korea, we highly recommended as someone who understood the startup ecosystem. So I think it implied you were doing some really amazing work, and the people really appreciated your leadership, right? So just going now into APYE, I mean, I didn't know what APYE was before I met you, and you were nice enough to invite me to the APYE Korea. Can you just talk a little bit about how you got involved in APYE and how you got the role of, the head of that program last year, and how was that experience for you? In 2019?
Yeah. So I was familiar with the APYE, the Asia Pacific Youth Exchange Program, since I was at the Asian Development Bank. So the first ever APYE was held in Manila in partnership with by an organization called the Youth Urban Youth Academy. And so it started with that. So I was always very familiar with it. And the APYE has been very successful in really the middle income and emerging market. So the Philippines, Thailand, it's even done an iteration in Malaysia. I think it was a social venture, which is slightly different focuses. But the APYE is really, it's an activation platform. It's about finding those. It's really about building a platform for the average young person going about looking for their spark, looking for something that makes them feel alive. And we hope to that they gain that experience really through this cross cultural immersion, going through leadership development training. The really special part about the APYE, which is the local immersion, where the participants are sort of deployed into communities across the country in order to understand community challenges and sort of ideate solutions around that. So there was always a vision to bring the APYE model to Korea and to at least to really make it work in Korea. There were several iterations, and I think one of the challenges with each iteration was that the leadership kept changing with the rendition in Korea. And I think a lot of that has to do with, of course, that Korea is not necessarily, and it is an emerging market in certain contexts, but it's not really an emerging market, right? It is a world-class leader. and so I think that there are definitely challenges, social and environmental challenges in South Korea as there are anywhere. There's growing disparities. It has very high Gini coefficient. And I think the ACYU really wanted to really expose that inequality that exists in Korea. Now, when I sort of joined, I was sort of brought into the ACYU program in the third iteration of ACYU, in order to really structure the program in a way that we might be able to better expose the participants to the underlying challenges that South Korea faces. And I think that was the first time that we did multiple communities. So that was, I guess, we joined in multiple communities and trying to engage and develop solutions. And I think what I realized from that experience, the first is that the context, the frame of reference, when you're building a business, when you're building a program, whatever it is really important. And the frame of reference for a lot of our participants was that Korea is the future, right? A lot of them came in really expecting to, enjoy the facilities and the culture, the K-pop, the dramas, and like the pop cultural elements and sort of aspects of Korea, which of course I think it is important, and I think in hindsight we could have done more to incorporate it into the program, but that was not the original objective. We really wanted to highlight the inequalities and the challenges, right? And I'm not sure that we were really able to successfully showcase that. The second element, the second thing that I really learned from managing the program is the importance of the brand and the culture of the organization. It was my first time actually being involved directly in the management of the ACYE program. And I think that I could have done better to really understand what are the cultural norms of this organization and the way that it's run, and really the spirit, right? And I think we can appreciate this of any brand that we're purchasing or that we love or the companies that we want to build, is that just like every individual, every organization has a spirit. And it is important that the organization remains true to that spirit. And I think that, I think we're when we were doing the program again, we could have definitely done more to bring in the spirit. Which again, we now, I think it was the context of it being in Korea that made it really challenging. And so this idea, especially of when we're thinking about developing businesses, is localization. Are you really adapting your solution to the norms of the market, behaviors, ways of communication, consumption, etc. And I think the third thing that I would say that was a great learning experience, is really relevant for early stage entrepreneurs, is still remembering that Rome was not built in a day, right? You have to lay down each brick one step at a time. And if you try to build too fast, you run the risk of implosion, right? And I wouldn't go as far necessarily to say, really, I think that with the ACYE program that year, we tried to incorporate a lot of news at the same time. We were running it in different sites. We had a brand new team, leadership and management team. We had a different structure to the program delivery. We had different modules. We were really building it from the ground up really fast. And again, it's the complexity of stakeholders. And so I think that where, especially for emerging entrepreneurs, you're always grappling with time, money, and resources. And there's always a trade-off. And I think that it's really important to really sit down and orient and have a strategic oversight of where you're trading off in the trilemma. And I think so. So I think with those three, those were probably my three key learning experiences from AIE.
Mm, mm, mm. No, yeah, thanks so much for sharing. I think I do think you did the best you could, and you I would say from as an outsider coming in, it must have been really difficult, being the first time for APY to have that first time in South Korea, but also being in a role where you actually had to understand the culture of the organization and integrating that into South Korea. Um, it must have been really challenging, but I would say I think you did a amazing job, uh, adjusting every week and doing the best you could to make sure everyone was involved and engaged, and the outcome, I think, was successful. So I think it shows your leadership and also um, your ability to think objectively on how to address certain issues specific to yourself, but also to how you run projects that have been assigned to you. So it was an honor to see your leadership in full display. So amazing. So just going to the next thing, UNDP. Can you just tell us how you got involved in UNDP and how that work has the how that work has maybe provided you with some exposure into other emerging markets and emerging entrepreneurs that are doing some great work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if there's anything that sort of ties the thread that ties my seemingly ludicrous career trajectory together,
Yes.
the thread is really relationships and connections, and understanding that the people that we come across, especially when we're young, they stay with us throughout our life. And we meet them in different places, spaces, frames, and we learn to journey together. And why I say this is because I joined the UNDP because my teammate in Vietnam was running this program. So
What's the name? What's the name of this? I think you mentioned this lady.
It's a he.
It's a he.
So
Okay.
my name, so my friend Savinda from Sri Lanka was also an international team member for AIESEC in Vietnam in my year, and always he's definitely one of the most inspirational human beings I have ever met. Savvy is he is jolly, he is optimistic, he is a hustler, and he is incredibly intelligent. And I should also say ridiculously fast at crunching numbers. So I had the privilege of working with Savi while I was in Vietnam. And then while I was in Korea, I was looking for new opportunities to expand, continue developing my career, especially across the Pan-Asian sort of landscape. And in 2019, I was a business coach for the Cartier Women's Initiative, where I had the opportunity to work with some really high level women entrepreneurs, top notch. And so a lot of that work was showcased on my social media pages. And one day I reached out to Savi, and I knew that his team was expanding. And I said, "Hey, Savi, I'm looking to transition in 6 months from Korea, and I'm just looking at opportunities." And he's like, "Great, I'll keep you posted." And he comes back to me with sort of a startup coordinator, manager, sort of advisory role. He said, "You can do this remotely. We really need help." Sort of guiding our entrepreneurs in emerging markets, and we think you have the experiences to be able to do that. I was like, okay, great. Let's see where this goes. And so I joined. And so the program, Youth Collab, is a joint initiative of the UNDP and the City Foundation. and it is operating in over 25 markets across Asia. And the agenda is to really mainstream youth leadership, social innovation, and entrepreneurship. And in order to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And while there are many initiatives really in this space, I think what makes this program very unique is that it's really targeting on leave no one behind. This agenda of really going grassroots, including marginalized groups, including LGBTQ, youth in conflict areas, youth from indigenous communities, and really bringing them in to I wouldn't say bringing them into something, actually. I would probably say shining the spotlight to where they are and the impact that they are making in their communities. And my role has been a little bit more focused on the high growth ventures. So we funnel the entrepreneurs so Youth Collab, as I mentioned, is operating in several markets. And so our country offices run the pre-accelerator incubator program and sort of policy dialogues at the national level. And then annually, the select number of teams are funneled up to the regional office for dedicated support. And so this is where I really get to work with some really inspiring teams. And just like one that I will share that just blows me away every single time I have the opportunity to talk about them. I want to talk about them. But it's a team called Deaf Talk. And they were started in Pakistan by founders Ali and Wamik. So Ali is blind and Wamik is deaf. And Wamik was studying in the US, and he realized, he actually started programming. So he's a programmer, and he realized that with his skills, he wanted to facilitate better opportunities for the deaf community. And so Deaf Talk provides online sign language interpretation. And they've been operating for nearly 3 years now. They've grown the business from Pakistan to Singapore. They've participated in the Google for Startups Accelerator. They've participated in accelerator programs in Singapore. They've been invited to sort of Silicon Valley to meet with the technology leaders there. And the prospect is, if they can grow the business to scale, we could really see mainstreaming of sign language interpretation, especially if they're able to use their data sets to develop an AI-based solution. We could really see the mainstreaming of their solution across across various industries and public spaces, and that to me is just as exciting as it gets.
That's amazing, and thanks for sharing the story. I'm sure there are a lot of entrepreneurs that without platforms like UNDP, it's pretty hard for them to access mentors like you, but also to have their stories being told in a way that you are inspired by it, and tentatively people get inspired by the work they're doing. So that's really cool. I think so. Right now, you're still a consultant at UNDP, right?
Yes.
And like just moving forward, because I know right now you're back in right now in Canada. How is it like? I know the time difference is the main difference, but I anticipate, right, you want to continue working with them and also maintain your relationships that you had or you have developed over time with Southeast Asia, right?
Yeah. So I guess it's as much as I think this is very much a double-sided coin, right? I mean, I have the opportunity to continue working in Asia because of, especially I guess during COVID, where everyone has truly gone remote, that I've continued to work with the UNDP. I've also continued to work with some of the communities that I was working with in South Korea, working with accelerators and startups there. But, Yeah, I think physical space is still relatively important.
Yep.
So I am sort of in the midst of transitioning into work here in Toronto. But I think given the future of work, I think that as we move into more modular sort of workflows, that I believe that I can continue engaging with entrepreneurs in Asia and, maybe even emerging markets elsewhere, because I think there's so much that can be shared. So I would like to continue working in Asia in whatever capacity, and now it's really, that's just been making sure that I'm scheduling my calls either early in the morning or late at night.
Yeah.
And I think also really, I think it's important to have a good team that can facilitate the changes in the workflow. So I've been very fortunate to have a team that, we support each other to carve out where we can add value. We don't see our roles as being static. We understand the dynamism, especially working with entrepreneurs. So I've been very fortunate to have sort of the flexible work arrangements with them. And so, yeah, I think right now, though, being in Toronto, I'm very excited to be in the Toronto ecosystem. It's really hype. It's a small but rapidly growing ecosystem. I'm actually planning on writing a piece this week on the recent acquisition of Wattpad by the South Korean sort of Google, the Naver. And I want to share a little bit more with the Canadian community, the ins and outs of the Korean tech giant, and hopefully, build those relationships now between Canada and the East.
Awesome. I know this was not part of the the questions I shared earlier, but the two things. One is, can you just share a little bit about the startup ecosystem in Toronto that you just talked about earlier? I mean, just give us a hint of it. And second, I know you have a newsletter. It's very interesting. I signed up, I subscribed to it, and probably share the link on the podcast here. Can you talk about first the Toronto startup ecosystem, and second about your newsletter, which is in relation to the piece you're talking about?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I'm an expert on the startup ecosystem here yet, but I'll share with you the pieces I've put together
so far.
So I think what's interesting about Toronto is, of course, it is very much connected to the American ecosystem. So when we talk about startups in Canada, there's a lot of comparison between to Silicon Valley, at least here in Toronto, right? But Canada is very large, and we do have very vibrant startups in Calgary. Clean tech is huge in Alberta. I think especially with the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, we're going to have to look more seriously at the prospects there. Vancouver is really big on various sort of software businesses like Thinkific. So the learning management sort of platform is headquartered in Vancouver. Montreal is huge on AI. It's probably one of the top bases to access AI talent. And Toronto, I think specifically, has been really big with fintech. Of course, we have Shopify headquartered in Ottawa. That's been our big e-commerce player. But more and more, there's a lot happening in Canada. It's a small but rapidly emerging community. But I think what's really interesting about the Canadian ecosystem is really the attention to inclusivity and equitability, right? And I think these are very strong Canadian values. And I think that's probably where a lot of the comparison to Silicon Valley, I think, is a little bit unfair, because I do think that, again, place, culture, the people matter a lot. So I'm excited to be a part of the narrative now here in Toronto. And so then speaking a little bit about my newsletter, I'm still a little bit shy about it. So
no, it's great.
Started this. Yeah, I'm a little bit shy. I think it's probably one of the more really out there initiatives I've taken. So I actually did veer down the path of entrepreneurship myself last year. I was trying to put together a startup in the international student market. And obviously with COVID, it's just, universities went to an existential crisis and it didn't quite work out. But that being said, I realized that, maybe my time as an entrepreneur will come, maybe it won't. I'm still working that out. But I know that I love working with founders. I love working with entrepreneurs, and I love working in the startup ecosystem. And I think that it's not just about work, it's really about belief, right? It's about an endless curiosity and a drive to reimagine what our world can look like, and to imagine really a better future. And so the newsletter, which is titled The Zany, so zany is defined as being sort of amusingly unconventional, right? So sort of idiosyncrasies, unconventional ways, ideas, and idiosyncrasies. And I think, as you can see, I'm sure you can tell from my podcast, is I've got a lot of different interests, a lot of different experiences, and I've been trying to figure out how do I bring that together into my life story? How do I really share my narrative? And so I started the Zany as a way, first and foremost, really just to express my story, to share unashamedly that I have this bottomless curiosity and I have no idea where it's going to take me, but I am so excited for where it might. And so in this newsletter so far, I've shared about Bitcoin. I've written on the stored value of Bitcoin. I talked about Deaf Talk. I shared about sort of Jack Dorsey's moves on Twitter, and beer. And I'm hoping actually for my upcoming piece, I will, I'm writing right now about, as I mentioned, the Wattpad acquisition. But after that, I'm really looking to write about clean energy. I think that, I think that there's a lot of potential under the Biden administration to really grow this industry.
Yep.
And frankly, it's good for the planet, right?
Yep.
And I'm really curious to see how clean energy really merges the worlds of, profit, planet, and people.
Definitely. I would say continue. It's a very, very good. The last piece I got from you, I learned a lot. So please continue doing that. I'm sure a lot of people will really appreciate your curiosity. I think there's a shared value in that, and please, I would say just keep on doing that. And maybe you can evolve into something else. I mean, maybe you should even start your own podcast as well.
Let's see, one step at a time. I'm learning truly to build Rome one brick at a time.
Yes, no, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, so any lessons you want to share with the listeners in terms of what your life has been so far, and like what are the, let me say, key takeaways of how to be resilient? I know you're a very resilient person, I can tell from my observation. You'll say that you're very intuitive, you're very go-getter. You actually get things done very professionally, but also very efficiently. I mean, from your life experiences so far, what are some of the let me say advice? I consider you as one of the smart people I've met, and someone who actually can share some word of wisdom to people.
This is quite the flattery, Jacob.
I'm serious. I think that a few people, like I can count with my one finger or my one hand, that I fall in that category.
I do appreciate that.
Honestly, say from an honest person. Yeah.
No, I think I would say that I feel that I'm always learning. And I think if there's anything I would say is I don't necessarily think about advice. I just think about sharing stories. And I think when I share my stories, I leave it up to the listener to take whatever lesson they feel is relevant for their life. And I think so I wouldn't necessarily frame this as advice. I'll just share again, maybe what I've realized in my short time, is that, I think the concept of a narrative and writing your story really permeates across every discipline. Whether working in government, working in the private sector, working with startups, working, a story is what hooks people, right? And I think that regardless of where you come from and what you're doing right now, understanding that at every moment you have the ability to write your own story. And as long as you are alive, you have a chance, and that's a bit of a spiritual way to end this, but I'm definitely, I think I do meditate regularly, and it's something that I sit with every day. No matter, there are days where I'm in complete shambles, and I'm lost, I'm disoriented, and I let the darker thoughts in my head take over, and that's fine. I think it happens to the best of us. But I always try to come back to just feeling myself breathing, looking at the sky, taking a walk, enjoying a cup of tea with my mom, and I, regardless if, especially being the pre-entrepreneur sort of work that you're doing, for anyone really considering being an entrepreneur, understand that there is no good or bad entrepreneur. There are so many types. You don't have to look to the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos as examples. Learn to look into yourself, your story, and start building from there.
Powerful. That is so powerful. Just talking to you and thinking about, Kamala Harris got sworn in yesterday. I kind of see some Kamala Harris.
All right, Jacob.
Seriously. Thanks for being on the pod. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to all the great things you're gonna do. And just thank you so much for for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, and thank you for all the work that you and Jamani Ventures are doing. I've been following along. I'm really excited always to see it. I'm always trying to scope some opportunities for you on LinkedIn.
Yes,
and
I saw that.
I think it just comes down to the relationships, and I'm looking forward to seeing where our stories will merge once again.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a great time. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.